He's been called the maestro of mayhem. I call him the godfather of the Seattle Underground. In 4+ decades, he's been the face and the curator of the Rosco Louie Gallery, Graven Image, the Center of Contemporary Art, the Experience Music Project, and Fantagraphics. Linda Barry, Andy Warhol, Robert Mapplethorpe are just a few of the artists he's worked with and curated. Proud to call him a friend since 1983. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Larry Reid. Larry, thanks so much for being our fresh face in hell
Happy
this
to
week.
be here.
I want to start at the beginning with you because in all the years I've known you, I've sort of known you in your sort of contemporary context of wherever you're working, whether it was the Graven Image first and then CoCA and stuff like that. Tell me about young Larry. Who was this guy? Where did he come from? Where were you born? When did you come to Seattle? And have you always been an organizer, a community
Well,
builder?
born
Let's
and
just start at
raised
the
in
beginning.
Seattle, 1953. I grew up on Queen Anne Hill, and I was an odd little kid from the time I can remember. I wanted to be an art curator. My friends wanted to be cowboys or astronauts or baseball players. My great grandmother lived very near Volunteer Park, and most Sundays, at least once a month, the family would go visit her, and oftentimes we'd visit the
That's where
Seattle
the
Art
Sam
Museum,
was back then, right?
and I didn't quite understand the concept of a museum. It was I became familiar with Dr. Fuller, the director there, and as a probably 6, 7, 8-year-old, I came to the conclusion that it was this eccentric old man's house, probably because I was visiting my great grandmother there. And he would greet me and pat me on the head. Seattle was a very different place then. Um, and I remember one day in particular, I had my nose pressed against the glass of this display of Ming Dynasty snuff bottles. They're still there, by the way, at the Asian Art Museum now. And I was looking at him, and he came up and explained to me what they were for, which only enhanced their sort of appeal to me. And there were a couple of dozen of them, and I asked him if I could have one. and and you've got all of these. I want the little red one with the dragon on it. And that's when he explained, in a way, these are all yours. And he described what he did as being a caretaker of these things, so all for everybody. And I think it was at that moment I decided that's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to take care of the Ming Dynasty snuff bottle. So over the years, uh, throughout my misspent youth, I spent a lot of time as I grew up. I would volunteer go to the art museum and volunteer, and I'm certain I was just an intolerable nuisance, but everybody there was very nice to me, and I'd occasionally stuff envelopes and, do minor little tidy up a little bit. And on occasion, they took me down to the bowels of the art museum to retrieve a work of art, and um, that was it. I mean, I never veered very far from wanting to do what I do. Um, I recall after
That's amazing.
graduating from Central Washington State College with a um, major in art history, I opened a gallery, and at that by that time, Dr. Fuller was in a wheelchair, but they had a show of Lichtenstein, and he and the pop artist Roy Lichtenstein. He introduced me to the artist and said, as his young colleague. So at that stage, I sort of decided I'd reached my goal in life. Um,
So did you have I mean, have you always just been like an arbiter of taste or a collector, or did you have did you have any artistic aspirations of your own? Were you creating art, or was your interest always in just curating, collecting, you know?
I did take a lot as part of my studies. I took a lot of studio classes just so I could have a sense of what was involved in the techniques and process that familiarize myself with the creative process. I don't think I ever aspired to be an artist. I've dabbled in a lot of arts, and when I first opened my gallery, I didn't know a lot of artists in Seattle, so I would have these.
Now, is this before
This
Rosco
was
Louie? Sorry to
Rosco
interrupt.
Louie
Okay, so we're
in
talking about Rosco,
1978. Rosco Louie in Pioneer Square.
and this was in Pioneer Square.
I
This is before with how many galleries were down there? Eventually you had
Yeah,
Linda
there were
Ferris, you had
quite
a
a
bunch
few.
of
In
galleries.
fact,
It kind
my
of became
first location, I was attached to Linda Ferris, um, right around the corner. She was very supportive, even though what I was the work that I was championing was far removed from her aesthetic. I credit her with sort of keeping the gallery going in the early stages. Again, we were connected, but she would bring collectors over, and it was through that association that I think I um managed to penetrate the Pioneer Square art world. At the time, there were a number of galleries there. Yeah, artists had sort of repopulated Pioneer Square in the early 70s. And by 1971, and by 1978, when I opened, it was in pretty full swing.
And so you've always sort of, I mean, though obviously you studied classical art and as an art history major, but you've just always sort of jibed with the avant-garde and and that was the case at Roscoe Louie. I mean, it sounds like Linda Berry was dealing with more establishment, like
Later,
the kind
she
of art you
was.
sell.
It was serendipitous. When I opened my gallery, a trio of really gifted cartoonists that emerged from Evergreen State College in Olympia. I knew Charles Burns.
And they were.
I met Charles Burns at, in art school. He briefly, before he transferred to Evergreen, he went Central Washington. So I knew him. I knew Linda Berry through friends, and got to know Matt Groening, and uh, I knew Linda, Charles Burns, and Matt Groening were um, really influential, and I gave them all their first shows out of college, and Linda Berry was exceedingly popular, kind of paid my rent. She later became, uh, very successful and a high-profile figure, but right out of college, she wasn't that well known. Um, so through those artists, I later, was able to show people like Art Spiegelman and Gary Panter, but it's also coincided with punk rock, sort of, emerging in as an aesthetic. I describe Rosco Louie as being neo-Dada, but, punk rock is an adequate, um, description of that aesthetic, and
Well,
go ahead.
oh, well, I was gonna say that's what made Graven Image unique. I mean, there were other all ages clubs, there were the other punk clubs, oftentimes it was, a rental hall, an Eagles Hall or something like that. But Graven Image always kind of you had the gallery upstairs and you had the music venue downstairs. So it was like, it was a hybrid from
Right.
the
Well,
start.
with Rosco Louie, I soon discovered that a lot of these artists also were musicians and had bands, and I would try to program bands. It was a smaller space, and, I would try to, promote music and performance art and, other events pretty much between exhibitions. Um, but over time, I grew disenchanted with the economic model of selling art. In the first place, uh, there wasn't a big market for really edgy punk rock art, and I just didn't like the sort of approach you had to take to generate revenue with selling art. So after almost 5 years.
There's a lot of you got to deal with a lot of
Yeah,
bougie
you do,
people. I mean,
and,
who has the disposable
right,
income to pay
and
$20,000 for a
I
work of
can
art? And what are the chances they're going to like Matt
yes,
Groening?
well, I there were people like, for instance, the late author Tom Robbins was very, was a great patron, and, in fact, I was recently in touch with his son Fleetwood and had to remind him that those Linda Berry paintings are worth a lot of money now. Um, but, yeah, so at a certain point, I saturated that market and again, just became less enthusiastic about selling art. A lot of the artists that I showed, rightfully so, had sort of expectations that I wasn't able or willing to fulfill. Um, and I just after almost 5 years, I became more interested in, uh, experimental music and emerging media art, video primarily, and film, and literary arts and poetry. So I was able to, uh, move from Rosco Louie just up the street 3 blocks and, had a separate gallery space and a larger performance space, so the conflict wasn't much of a concern, and, I went from the model of selling art to admissions-based model, and, that was great. The Graven Image the
And those admissions were never more than
no,
$4 or $5
yeah,
in
through
my
3 to
memory.
5
Yeah.
tops, that was a real interesting environment, when I moved from Rosco Louie to Graven Image, that was exactly at the time, Hugo Piazza, opened an all ages club called in a
The
former gay
Metropolis.
bar called the Golden Horseshoe. It was
Oh,
Metropolis.
wasn't it the Love
Huh?
Canal? Or was it the was the gay
It
bar the
it
Love
it was
Canal
the
or the
Golden
Golden Horseshoe?
Horseshoe earlier. It may have
Okay.
changed names. I remember that because it was, there was a primarily gay disco called Shelley's Leg, and then after Shelley's Leg closed down, the Golden Horseshoe had some arrangement with Espin, and they stayed open until 3 or 4 in the morning, and, we called it the leg in the shoe. Um, but the Metropolis opened there, a block from Graven Image. I'd gotten to know Hugo very late within the last few months of Roscoe Louie. So in Metropolis, there was a a cooperative gallery called Ground Zero. There was a sort of rehearsal slash performance space right across the street called the Gray Door. And we were
Oh,
all in,
is that what we're calling it?
well,
It was like the gray door where we
yeah,
got paid in
there
pot, and
you
it was
go.
like the
That
ceilings were like
place.
7.5 feet
It,
tall. I remember Jim, the owner, would pay us
yep,
in
yep.
pot. That place was like
Well,
fire code
I mean, they had some
nightmare, man.
interesting shows there, though. I think I saw GBH there once. I mean, it was a rehearsal space for some interesting acts. That was directly across the street. Uh,
It was such a wonderful I mean, like, as you just there was like a 1 block radius there. I think of my poor teenagers today, and I'm sure you thought of Bella when she was a teenager, like, where is all that infrastructure for her? We had 3 amazing all ages clubs that were just totally I don't know, total punk rock, all of them with an ethos of this is kinda, just govern yourselves. This isn't like a adult establish own. These are the rules. It was kind of a free fall. We had all that. It was like a playground, and it was all there in Pioneer Square amongst the stew bums and You know, the post-industrial Boeing bus town waste of a it was just amazing, dude.
Yeah, and we were all within a couple blocks of each other. What was even more amazing is how inexpensive those spaces were. I mean, that's why we were able to do it. The rent on Graven Image, which again had a gallery upstairs and a performance space downstairs, was
Can I
it's a
guess?
go
Can I
ahead.
guess? I was gonna guess 50 cents a
Well,
square
maybe
foot.
it was $165 a month. I let bands perform there, so I had 3 bands that paid $50 a month for unlimited access. You know, I had my own PA. Now, the bands almost never paid me, so I would, have them open for touring acts or sometimes headline or perform at, gallery openings. But it was essentially my rent was the net rent was $15 a month, you know, and a lot of those other spaces weren't a lot more.
You can't get 2 lattes
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
$15 a
It
month
was,
now, right?
it was sort of a delightful time, and this coincided with the emergence of the Seattle sound. We hosted a number of bands that were, uh, influential or foundational when that in the grunge era, for lack of a better word. It was, I remember groups like 10 Minute Warning, that sort of an outgrowth of the Farts, and Duffy McKagan was in that band, um, Greg Gilmore, really important, uh, musicians that were either performing or just, part of the audience. Um
I shot a lot of I mean, I think, well, Malfunction, I'm
Oh,
pretty
yeah,
sure
yeah,
played
yeah.
Graven Image I can remember, and U-Men,
Sure,
and even March of
yeah,
Crimes, and then there was the touring acts
right.
as
It
well.
was, and then we'd have these great joint cover nights with Ground Zero, Graven Image, and Metropolis, where we'd have excess of 15 bands for 3 to $5, you know? We just kinda took over that neighborhood. Yeah, it was Seattle at that time was pretty fascinating, and I started to get the sense I watched the audience grow and was starting to get the sense that something interesting was happening. I never would have imagined it growing to the extent that it did, but, um, it was there was a ton of creative freedom. You know, Seattle, unlike other parts of the country, San Francisco, LA, there wasn't really a defined, you know, punk rock sound. I think there was a lot of experimenting going on. I mean, Seattle was a small town. We all knew each other. We all supported each other's efforts, and it was it was pretty experimental and really eclectic. Within that sort of punk rock community, there were dozens of bands that had uh, singular approaches to the punk rock movement.
Yeah, and, I mean, I think we've, jarred loose a couple of thoughts here, one of them being that I think, along with Seattle not having that defined sound, I also feel like just Seattle didn't have this sort of self-conscious sense of its place in the larger culture. It was kind of an
Oh,
outpost still. I
absolutely.
mean, yeah, we had the World Fair in '62, but Seattle until the '90s, Seattle was basically like 85% natives, you know what I mean? There wasn't a lot of LA, San Francisco, Vancouver, these towns had a lot of influx of people coming in and out of it, and so I think part of that sound came from the fact that, like, there wasn't like, in LA, there was the OC sound, that second wave hardcore sound, and there was these Seattle, it was like you had some heavy metal, you had some goth, you had some, industrial music, and all these kids, there was only so many of us to go around. We're just like, "All right, well, you're a drummer, I'm a guitar player, you're a bass player, and you can scream into a mic, let's start a band." And I think the resultant sound was something that was not predictable, not anything you could loophole or neatly fit into a genre.
You're exactly right. It's very fluid too. I think I think a lot of factors contributed to that sort of elasticity, but there wasn't a lot of dogma, and that was particularly, I think, uh, and there wasn't a compartmentalized scene. Everybody back then, there wasn't really a lot of spectators. Everybody was a participant. Almost everybody was in a band or several bands or had a zine or was an artist or silk screen printer, poster maker. I think, yeah,
Photographer
photographer. I
too.
mean, it was,
So many
yeah,
cameras. That's why we have such a treasure
it was,
trove of
and it was unique. I went to other parts of the country, and um, I it was and talking to other musicians to this day, but how enthusiastic the audiences were, and how everybody would show up. To these shows that really didn't have a lot of commonality other than it was just part of our little community. And it was homegrown. And you hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that. It was a homegrown community, a homegrown sound, a homegrown movement that for a long time didn't have much impact. And a lot of the bands that did succeed, a lot of the musicians had to leave town in order to do that. And
yeah, go down to
yeah,
LA,
well,
pay to
Duffy
play, try
went to
to
LA, and I think Greg went
Mike
down there with
McCready
him.
did
Yeah,
too, and he came back
yeah, Greg
empty-handed.
did,
So
uh, yeah, I remember Greg.
well, you bring up community, and this is something that is so unique. I mean, you were still young at this point, but I think you were older than most of the people
Yeah, I
involved.
was
So
10 or
you
15
became
years
kind of
younger.
an older, but far from like an establishment figure. You were one of us, but like one of us that had his shit a little bit more
A
together,
little
like
bit more
Hugo, because he
together.
was an adult. Well, from my 14-year-old perspective, if you had your own apartment, you had your shit together. But like you set that tone, and as well as Hugo, you set that community tone. That part of it wasn't just us kids showing up. It was the ownership of the establishments that encouraged that let us gave us the keys to the asylum and didn't like,
Mhm.
I mean, I like you, I'd been to other parts of the country and I'd go to San Francisco and LA, and it was you just felt like, okay, this is a club owned by an adult and there's a cover and there's rules and there's a doorman and like, don't get out of line, and it's, you know what I mean? You gotta I never felt that in any of the clubs we've talked about here. And that's a testament to you and to Hugo. You're a great community
Well, there
builder.
was a collective consciousness happening here, and it's sorta hard to describe unless you were part of that community. Um, and we'd sort of enforced our own rules. I don't remember having a lot of problems, for instance, with skinheads or, you know, it was, uh it was a delightful time to be young. I was 10 or 15 years older than most of the artists and audience, but, still young enough to enjoy myself, and um but, old enough to be able to navigate the reality of maintaining a venue. So not long after Graven Image, I, um, I re I w it's I should mention the U-Men. The U-Men re I was the, manager of the U-Men, and that sort of I think that came about from a show I did at Rosco Louie with the Fastbacks and the Living. Duff, by the way, was in both of those bands, but,
Duff was in 10-Minute
he
Warning too.
was, he
Another
was,
band Duff was in. I think Duff
people
was,
question
yeah, I got
Duff's
I
punk rock pedigree sometimes, and it sort of annoys me because,
Noise, dude, he goes back to
yeah,
like 77, 78. Yeah, I mean, and he was not that much
no,
older
no,
either. Yeah.
he was right in the wheelhouse, but, uh, John Bigley and other members of the U-Men were at that show, and they'd been having a really hard time, getting it together, and they asked me if I could booked them some shows, which soon enough became led me to become their manager. And the U-Men were able to build up a fairly substantial audience. And one of the first Seattle bands that signed with a major label or a national label, went on national
Labels.
tours. That was on Homestead Records. That was home to Sonic Youth, uh, Big Black, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Dinosaur Jr. And the U-Men were on that label. Green River later was on that label, but we were the first, and we went on tours, bologna sandwiches and beer tours and siphoning gas,
Oh,
and
yeah.
somehow managed to get from one town to the other. And I think that
Didn't you guys get stuck in
oh
Arizona for a
yeah,
while? I
stuck,
seem to remember. I think you actually got stuck
on
with.
Danny Bland's place. I think
Yeah, yeah.
we just uh it was amazing. We just roll into town and somehow or another uh managed to ingratiate ourselves with the local scene. But they ended up inspiring, the U-Men were never financially successful, but I think a lot, and I know a lot of the younger musicians looked at the U-Men and determined that maybe this was a viable career path even.
Yeah,
Yeah,
credibility, a
and
bus, even if it broke down.
um,
I mean,
yeah, I mean, they weren't associated necessarily with the later Seattle sound, but I think they inspired a lot of those musicians to um bigger and better things.
yeah. I mean, in a way, I mean, there's definitely a Northwestern root to their sound a little bit. I mean, I think of them a little more. I can hear a little
Oh
Wipers
yeah.
similarity with the U-Men and the Wipers, and those are two of the most seminal Northwest bands. But I don't hear the Sonics there. I don't hear what we later associate with Mudhoney and Nirvana and things like that. But yeah, the U-Men are I feel like U-Men and Fastbacks. Not that they sound alike, but those are two of I think the kind of the seminal early mid '80s Seattle bands that didn't get signed. That to those of us who were there are still like legends,
Still, yes.
late greats.
Yeah,
Yes.
those are the 2 bands I've seen the most uh, throughout my career. And, the other thing about those 2 groups, and, a lot of the bands there, if you got a show or if you achieved any level of, success or notoriety, you were, almost obligated to share that, and, bring everybody else along, and it sort of worked. Again, by the time I moved to CoCA, the Center of Contemporary Art in 1988, I I started to get the sense that our little scene had the potential to really penetrate pop culture in a major way. I
Yeah, and let's talk about the square footage right about. I mean, this
Oh,
is a
yeah.
big. I mean, Graven
So
Image was about
I went
400
from
square feet, and CoCA
800
was,
square feet to 2,000 square feet to 15,000 square feet. You know, my, m
and then
yeah,
back to
my
1,200
tenure at
eventually. But
CoCA,
we're getting there.
at the time CoCA, the Center of Contemporary Art, that was a fairly prestigious institution. Um, and,
Center
yeah,
of Contemporary Arts. For those of you who
so
don't know what CoCA
at
is.
one point, I was, oh, the director job became available. I was on tour with the U-Men. In fact, we just opened for Big Black at 7th Street Entry in Minneapolis, and, I got a call that I had been shortlisted. I don't remember applying for that job, and I think I was just recommended somehow. Um, at any rate, I flew back from the tour hungover and disheveled and, sleeping in a tour bus, with virtually no hope of getting that job. And, you know, by the time rejoin the band and got a call in Detroit, and lo and behold, I'd beat out two far more qualified candidates for that position. I'm still
That was inevitable, though. I can't even imagine if it had gone to
well,
somebody else. I don't think Seattle would have continued on
my
its
life would have been
trajectory because
far different. I can say that.
I think the life of the Seattle music scene would have been a lot
Yeah,
different. I
oddly
mean, I
enough,
think that was kind of a
I was
watershed
appointed
moment.
to that position. About 2-3 nights later, the U-Men opened for Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds at Danceteria in New York. This is actually I may have misstated dates earlier. This was the fall of 1985. And there in the band room was Lydia Lunch and, filmmaker Richard Kern and, all these interesting artists. And Blixa Bargeld, who was a Bad Seed, he was in Nick Cave's band, was telling me about his other group, Einsters and Neubauten, this experimental noise band. And,
That just rolls off the tongue.
yeah, I just
Einsters of
booked I booked all those people right on the spot, Fetus, Jim Thirlwell. It was, I was appointed to that position, and within a week, I had completely changed the direction of CoCA. And, later impacted Seattle, I think fairly dramatically. And I don't want to assume credit for any of that. I think it was just sort of the zeitgeist and a lot of the advantages we had in Seattle being isolated and provincial and, this little fishing village in the corner of the country. It turned out to be an asset because nobody was
absolutely.
paying any attention to what we were doing. We were able to just develop out of the spotlight. And by the time I got to CoCA, that had, a huge amount of space, it had an actual budget, it had funding, and, I flew in Einsters and Neubauten from, West Berlin, and I just had the resources to be able to fully display, uh, national and international artists and put local artists and musicians in that context. I was able to bring in, people like William S. Burroughs and Kathy Acker uh, and then have Nirvana and Mudhoney and um, Big Black and all these real interesting groups that were happening nationally and program local and regional acts, artists in that context. And I think just by association, they became sort of part of this movement. It's difficult to describe. In the moment, you're not really attentive to things like that. It's
You can feel them, though. You feel
you
it going
can
on.
and
You feel it when you're a part of the zeitgeist.
I felt it just with the number of people showing up. I mean, in the early days, there was maybe a couple, 300 of us. If somebody new came to a show, we'd all like run up to him and introduce ourselves. I mean, the audience just became uh, uh, substantial. I mean, over in a short period of time, it grew exponentially.
Yeah, we had Charles Peterson on the show not long ago, and we were talking about the one CoCA show with Mudhoney and Nirvana and just how packed that was. I've already apologized to you for sneaking into that show through the girls' bathroom because I rented the Oceanic right across in the
Right.
back alley. My apartment window looked right at the back window
Awesome.
of that. So all I had to do is climb up the fire escape and through the bathroom. But Charles and I were talking about like that being one of the first shows where we were like, man, I don't recognize some of these people. I mean, I see a lot of familiar people when I see the pictures, but Charles was like, I remember looking around and just thinking, God, there's so many people here I don't recognize. That's what I mean. It was kind of a watershed moment. I mean, I see the development of this thing in these kind of three stages, of the first one being like 1983, 84, Graven Image, Metropolis, and then kind of the CoCA era where it was like bands were signing to labels like Homestead, as you mentioned, and stuff like that. And then 92, 93, when it just became like, Europeans coming to touch the hem of Kurt's garment
When it
and
became
so forth,
less
when it really
interesting.
blew
No,
up.
I think,
Oh, clearly
I
less
I
interesting.
wanna mention now, though, that I'm sort of this narrative has emerged in recent years that, so I think exaggerates the role that I played in that music, explosion. I was my focus is always visual and, more performing arts and literary arts, but, just by default, I, uh, was involved with a lot of music.
Well, you're being humble kind of there too. I mean, if you're providing the venue and managing bands, it's kind of hard to understate
Yeah,
your influence. But go ahead. I'll
in
give you a minute to be
in
humble.
hindsight,
I'll
that
keep
might be
I'll pump you up. You go ahead and
that
chop
might be
yourself
the
down.
case
I'm
in
all
hindsight. I think my role, though, I mean, there were a lot of people that really devoted all their time and effort to, um, the music, element of that grunge movement, for lack of a better word. Um, I think what I added was sort of a broader cultural context. You talk about that, Nirvana Mudhoney Tad show, which was great, but, it was a series of events like Kathy Acker and Karen Finley and, survival research laboratories. I think that added sort of some cultural cachet that was really kind of important, and it was hard to ignore. It was hard for the local and national media to overlook the fact that something was, uh, culturally important was happening in Seattle. Um,
Yeah, let's not forget that other people, I mean, you had some, I mean, it made a huge impression on me, and I haven't been in a band since 1986, and, like, but the literary arts element of it and, like, meeting Jesse Bernstein when I was
right.
a teenager, and then, like, Tommy Hansen,
That's true.
RIP, he wrote what I consider to be the best recovery novel I've ever in American Junkie, just because it's so unsentimental and just so raw and undressed and not like kumbaya-ish at all. It's just like, this is the big boil that formed on my hip and my bones. I mean, but it's just I was very aware of that. And like artists emerge out of that scene like Harold
Right.
Hollingsworth and illustrators like Ed Fotheringham and all these different artists. And I think I don't know if you can say that about the Mabuhay Gardens in San
Probably not.
Francisco. I don't know. I don't know. Probably not. But I mean, so again, your reach, you by bringing in these other, I know that I was culturally sensitive to the fact that there was more than just music going on around me, because that ultimately wouldn't be my entree into my life as an artist. I mean, I was 17 years old, 16 years old the last time I was in a band. But growing up around, and Hugo had this too, when Hugo opened
Right.
Metropolis, he envisioned it as more of a gallery, weird hybrid space. So both of you guys had this thing going on, that I think, I mean, to me, and so many of the people I talk to about now, which is the other thing, is that 40 years later, this community still, exists. And we can talk about Georgetown. I'm building to Georgetown, how it's like kind of the last little epicenter of what that was community wise. I think the fact that you brought these visual and literary arts into it was huge to my personal development, because it wasn't just about going to music.
Yeah, it was they were sort of inseparable, I mean, uh, Lydia Lunch to William S. Burroughs to Sonic Youth. I mean, a lot of there you couldn't slip a piece of paper between a lot of these things. It's, I think it was kind of a unique time. In 1991, I had an exhibition. I brought up Robert Crumb, the famous underground cartoonist. He was in Seattle for a couple of days, and He said, "This is exactly like San Francisco was in 1967." You know, he said, You have the music, you have this graphic sensibility, this anti-fashion thing, and he said, "You have all these cartoonists that are here to sort of record this, movement." Then he went on to predict that it would fall apart, that some artists and musicians would become rich and famous, and the others would become bitter, and everything would get insanely expensive, and that's exactly what happened in San Francisco and
I mean,
here.
that's a
Yeah,
cultural
yeah, yeah.
continuum. I mean, that was the summer of
Yeah,
love,
summer
right? I
but
mean,
I thought it was interesting that
65 Monterey Pop
yeah,
was it, that was like that was the great band. Then by 67, you had Coca-Cola
right.
moving in
It
and,
was sort of interesting to hear that from a participant because I sort of felt that. I felt like Seattle had all the elements of an impactful youth movement, um, sort of like the hippie era, but, and they shared a lot in common, but it was, a fascinating period in Seattle, and I think for me, there was a degree of, pride and accomplishment in just seeing our city being recognized as a cultural, capital.
It's fine. I feel you. You get a little chip on your shoulder after a while. You know who doesn't still give Seattle that is the national
Oh,
sports
yeah.
writers. Like whenever the college football, we still they say out there in Seattle, but culturally, I remember during that time, late '80s, early '90s, when things started to, when Seattle started to kind of to edge its way towards front and center in this sort of global cultural consciousness. I remember the New York Times culture section, like, weekly running stuff on Seattle, whether it was about coffee, whether it was about art galleries, whether it was about emerging sounds, whether it was about, it's kind of the
Personal
inevitable
computing,
conclusion if
I
it's
mean,
yeah.
Microsoft happened at that, uh, gave rise to, personal computing, and, Seattle just became this mecca for not just artists and musicians, but, programmers and, I think the cream of the crop, not just nationally, but internationally, people were moving here.
Now, this is the perfect transition to the Experience Music Project, which just sort of illustrates the convergence we're talking about. Like,
Oh, right.
suddenly you've got this gigantic, built from the ground up to be a museum. Looks like a piece of chewing gum somebody discarded on the sidewalk to me personally. Um, Huge space. I don't even how many square feet is the EMP? It's gotta
Hard to
be
calculate
well,
because it's
200,000
so,
or so yeah. Exactly. Exactly. How
chewing
do you
gum like.
you usually go, "Well, the room is 10 foot by square." Well, not if you go up the wall a foot. Yeah, that's a really good point. It is really hard to calculate. Um, how did and you ended up being the
Well,
curator
a
there
curator.
and a
Yeah, they
curator.
called my job spam, spending Paul Allen's money, I bought things to sort of populate that museum, and, I didn't have a lot of curatorial, latitude there, which was frustrating. I did do a show I'm really proud of about, Jesse Bernstein, uh, and, a few other things that I programmed, but I that was one of the few jobs I had that were the only jobs I've ever had in my life that I didn't like. I like the people I worked with, but it was very institutional, it was very corporate, it was run like I imagined a software company would be run by Paul Allen, the founder.
Yeah, or an amusement
Yeah,
park
it
or
it was just
something,
weird.
right.
It's really hard to, it
Well, I always had a beef with their musical curation because I was like it was small, but okay, there's Andy Wood's
yeah.
bass and some show flyers, and I was always like I'd go in there and I'd be like, "God, this could be so much more," and whoever was curating that, I'm sure had their hands tied, and that's the problem because I was like, I could get on the phone right now, call 14 of my old punk rock buddies and we could go into our basement and put together,
Yeah.
curate something that would be more insightful, more, so it always did have kind of that glossy vibe a little bit. So I could see it's kind of inspiring that
Well,
you
that was
were able to get a
everything
Jesse
happened at
Bernstein.
pretty much happened at the direction of Paul Allen, I think it might be getting a little more interesting now that he's passed, but, uh, I don't think there's a whole lot of hope for that institution just because of the structures that are in place. I will say they paid well, and I shouldn't complain too much. There just wasn't that sense of uh, camaraderie or a shared vision or mission at it. EMP for me,
Nobody was hungry enough.
EMP
Let's
for
just
me
say
was
it.
a job, and
Yeah.
it was just a little too. It was not a little too. It was way too polished, and I thought it was just incongruous to have a lot of this uh, memorabilia, enshrined uh, as it was, and it creeps me out a little bit, to be honest with you.
I feel you. I'm still listen, there's a certain type of person, you're one, I'm one. We're just kinda got that bohemian DNA, like, it was a struggle for me being at the biggest publisher in the world, having grown up at independent presses, it was a struggle for me being wrapped up in a culture where there was just, like, something called best
Yeah.
practices, or you know what I mean? Like, because, the minute you have groupthink, you
Yeah,
know, somebody gotta make a decision. The minute anytime no great artistic decision was ever made by a committee, ever. You know what I mean? Because you gotta start to look at the individual parts and what's the dynamic of a committee. Somebody's just worried about their job. Somebody doesn't wanna say what's on their mind because they're worried about getting fired. Somebody like so good decisions never, and I guess you could probably feel that in the curation of the
yeah,
EMP. It was very it was something you would expect to see in the lobby of, Vegas,
exactly. It
yeah.
was sort of like, the Hard Rock Cafe, with the billion-dollar budget, but I shouldn't I shouldn't denigrate my former employer. I guess it has its place. It was let's just say it was a bad fit.
It's
When,
alright. They know, they sold their soul at some point, they all know, and hey, that's fine for them. Those kind of decisions make more and more sense once you start squirting kids out
yeah,
and
yeah,
things
yeah,
like
well,
that. So, I
I
don't
was
think you're
having
not
a kid,
denigrating anybody.
I had a kid at the time, and it was important for me to make it one of the few
Yes.
times in my life it was I've I felt pressure to make some money, I've always, I've grown accustomed to this, uh, bohemian, lifestyle and income, but, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, having kids sort of layers, responsibility onto that, but,
Absolutely. And, well, there's some advantages too. It makes you it, lights a little bit of more
yeah,
fire
yeah,
under
yeah.
your ass too. You suddenly become a little bit more productive, and some things you used to let fall by the wayside, you're on top of. But I don't think you have to worry about listen, I don't think anybody at the EMP or at Penguin can look at Graven Image or look at what I was doing at Soft Skull in 2009 and say, this has the same vitality as that. Just objectively speaking, if they like art at all, you have to say that this is something. This is a zeitgeist, and this is, an extension of that that's a little more, whatever, pedestrian or something. It's just, once you're starting to reach a larger audience, you're going to be
Yeah,
less,
and I still have, great
edgy.
relationships with some of my, former, colleagues and coworkers, how that being said, I was just thrilled when the opportunity came up to, return to Fantagraphics, where I had briefly worked as
Yes.
their marketing and, promotions director, to operate the bookstore in Georgetown. Gary Roth, the publisher, called me up and said they'd secured this cool space in Georgetown and wanted to do art shows and signings and, basically gave me a whole lot of latitude, almost free reign to operate this showroom. I think the original concept was a showroom for the publisher that uh, rapidly expanded its mission to include, nurturing emerging artists and, as well as presenting legacy artists. And I've always sort of thought of my
And it's
role.
a beautifully curated record
Yeah,
store
it's
too,
it's
like
just
so done
wonderful.
in
I've always thought of, my career as sort of my focus is examining the intersection between pop culture and fine art. And I think, I'd landed on the comics and the Georgetown neighborhood is just kind of this miraculous bohemian blue collar arts community that has yet to be gentrified and forcing the artists out. I mean, it's one of the last
And how hard have they tried for 40
really
years?
hard,
There's always been kind of a movement to try to infiltrate Georgetown. What we've got going down there, like in our days, sponsored by Rainier, is like when I see all the faces that come out for
right.
that and your street fairs that you run, and like you're still the head of the Merchants Association,
I
correct?
left a while back, but I'm still involved with that.
Yeah, you're
With
still kind of
those,
the
yeah,
unofficial mayor of
with those,
Georgetown. It really is kind of an surviving remnant of what we described in Pioneer Square. It's about the same size. It's only a few
right.
square blocks, but all that great stuff is packed in there and all those great people.
Well, the
And
other nice thing is it's a remote destination. I mean, you've been down to some events and seen you. We've chatted. We don't even get permits.
I've
We
done an
don't
event
even
there
get
even.
permits for those things. I mean, we're just sort of completely off the radar, and it's very punk rock. In fact, I hosted a human reunion of sorts last July, and somebody asked me, how I managed to get the permit, and I said, I got a punk rock permit. We don't need no sneaking permits. Uh,
It's just such a perfect place. I mean, when we started at the beginning of at the head of the show here, and you talked about getting out of college, and your first shows being Linda
yeah,
Barry and Matt Groening. I mean, the comics
right.
were there. I mean, it's like, like this is so full circle for you. The neighborhood is full circle from Pioneer Square to Georgetown, two neighborhoods. It's pretty inspiring that over 40 years, aside from, you just talked to that, that period of ascension while you're also a father, that CoCA was up and then the EMP was up, but then you're back to kind of this like very intensely
Yeah,
community-based,
I've
like
been blessed. I
neighborhood.
did something right in a past life because, and then just having this opportunity to operate this space with, so much flexibility, and incorporating visual art, comics, literary arts, music. I mean, you've been a part of that, but, just recently.
I would be a much better dude if I lived in
Yeah.
the neighborhood, I'd be
Well, I
there
mean,
every
you've
day.
read the
My
I mean,
my problem is I'm
you've
way the
appeared
hell
there
out in
several times, and I've said this publicly. I'm pleased to be able to say this to you. The reason you've been there, uh, is to help draw attention to emerging artists, and, I can't tell you how much that means to not just me, but the literary and arts community. But,
I'm still emerging, that's the problem. I'm still
yeah.
emerging. I don't know if I'll ever break out of my chrysalis, but I've managed to, I've managed to gather a big enough audience to make it sustainable and support a family of 6, but, like, I still
Yeah,
you know
well,
what I mean?
just in recent months.
I don't have a second home
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Maui
you
yet,
will,
let's just
you
say
will.
that.
Um,
Um, can I talk to you about something that's very
sure.
interesting to me personally, which is that, I wanna talk because I know this so well. I mean, I've done 17 national tours where all I do is go around to little independent bookstores all over the country. I've been to 500 of them, and everyone's different, and everyone that's successful has this one thing in common. There's no cookie cutter, formula for making an independent brick and mortar bookstore record shop, or there's only one commonality, and that is that you have to infiltrate your community. You have to make yourself, and that looks different in different communities. If my friend Michael Barnard and Rake Straw Books, which is a kind of East Bay, more wealthy, you know what I mean? That means doing things like hosting dinners and doing, plated dinners that have hardback cover editions. So, but it's a community environment, and you do what you do at Georgetown and all the little stores all over. They find a way to infiltrate their communities. I want to talk about, and in doing so, you're always sort of operating outside the orthodoxy of whatever industry we're talking about. So let's talk to me about some of the challenges of running a brick and mortar book and record store art gallery. Let's talk about some of the challenges, especially in 2025.
Well, one of the bigger challenges is unfortunately homegrown. We're in the belly of the Amazon beast. And I think you have to, because Amazon is big enough to offer uh not just discounted prices, but convenience. The convenience of being able to uh, click a few buttons on your phone and come home from work and have a box of books on your doorstep in 24 hours. Uh, I think what we have, what I concentrate on is providing an experience, as opposed to just books. Sure, you can buy books at Amazon, but did they have a live band, playing there, or or the artists there signing books and discussing their work, cartoonists showing slides, or artists exhibiting their artwork. I focus a lot of my energy on just the experience, and it's not just events. When customers come in, I try to make them not just feel welcome, but I try to create an environment where they're experiencing the space, and that's involves conversation. It involves playing music from the record store. It involves engaging them in their interests, and um you know taking some sort of ownership with the space. That's probably universally true in 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 my circumstances. I think trying to connect with the history of the neighborhood, um, connecting with arts community and literary community, the uh, musicians and artists, and conveying that somehow, those connections to customers. I mean, it's a challenging environment, and but I think particularly in the Northwest, we have a lot of bookstores that uh, all have our own singular approaches. We're not competitive. We're in the same field, the independent bookstores in the Pacific Northwest, but there's a great deal of respect and appreciation and sort of, I hate this word synergy, but there's a
Well, it's the same
commonality.
thing we were talking about when we were talking about all those
Yeah,
bands
yeah,
in
and
1983. I mean, it's a
that
mutual
extends to
support
the
system.
bookseller community here. I mean, I I I I don't even think of my colleagues as booksellers so much as lit lovers, you know? I mean, we're not doing this to make money, there's a million ways to make money. Selling books isn't one of them.
Uh,
Yeah,
aluminum cans is probably
and
more
that's something,
lucrative.
we all share.
Jesus, don't have a heart attack on me here, Larry. You're swallowing
No,
burps there, and I'm like, oh god,
I
it's Larry Reid's last media
inhaled
appearance.
my coffee.
Hey, we're winding down, but I got to ask you to talk to me because I know there's going to be some comic book fans out there. Talk to me about some of the exciting things going on under the Fantagraphic umbrellas in terms of the art and in the literature.
Well, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the first brand new comic by underground comics master Robert Crumb in 22 years, Tales of Paranoia, aptly titled. But what excites me are all the younger artists that were, many of them inspired by legacy artists like Robert Crumb or that era. Linda Perry is very influential. Charles Burns and others. The younger cartoonists are doing work that's socially relevant, wildly entertaining. There's experimental. There's so many. Every book has its own sort of signature approach to the medium.
Drop some young artists names for me.
Simon Hanselman is really exciting. An artist who's lived in Seattle until recently, but emerged from, Tasmania, via Melbourne. An artist named Brianna Lowenson from the Bay Area. Locally, artists like Mark Palm and Mita Mahato. There's an endless list of young cartoonists, a lot of them women, many of them BIPOC, a lot of LGBTQ plus artists that are doing exceptional work.
And so this is a realm that was kind of more white, cisgender. I mean, if you're going back 50, 60
Yes.
years to its beginnings, kind of mostly white, male, cisgender. So that's been one of the
Yes,
biggest
and
changes in comic culture.
That's
is
not
just the-
there's still white males doing it, but that's not the more interesting stuff. And I think what's exciting about this work is it's personal. It's not really didactic. It's not necessarily political. It's just to me, it's revelatory to be able to involve myself in these artists' experiences. And I think it's particularly satisfying to see these artists develop audiences and thrive. It's always been sort of my focus is younger emerging artists, and in the comics genre, we've been particularly pleased to have a number of these younger artists really having a profound impact.
And they were lucky to have you. Larry, you've been you've been a champion of emerging artists from the beginning. You've stayed true to this vision all along. You're truly a gem. I will continue to call you the Godfather of the Seattle Underground.
Okay.
He is Larry Reid. If you're in Seattle, I mean, a lot of our listeners are in the Puget Sound area, but a lot of them are national. If you're in Seattle, Georgetown is a little off the beaten path. You're not going to find it on your tourist map with Seattle Center and in the Pike Place Market. But do yourself a favor if you want to see the real Seattle. If you're somebody who thinks Seattle is cool because of the art that has emerged out of there, because of the music scene and the graphic art scene and the literary culture that is stemmer, you're not going to find it anywhere in a higher concentration or more fully alive than Fantagraphics Bookstore in Georgetown and the whole little neighborhood. Grab a beer at the 9 Pound Hammer while you're there. Larry, thanks so much for joining us, buddy. Appreciate you. I got to get out to the store and see you more often. Jesus, the way you sound right now, I better hurry up, man. You sound like you're about to keel over, dude. I got to get out there. Maybe it was just that double sausage breakfast you ate.
All right.
He is Larry Reid, and
Nice
he is a
chatting with you.
prince. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
joining us.